The air was thick with tension, and the ground beneath Ethan's feet shook as enemy ships roared overhead, launching bombs that rattled the very walls of the medical outpost. He could hear the distant sound of gunfire as his fellow soldiers prepared for the worst. The war was escalating, and this outpost, far from Earth, was now a target. Ethan's team was gathered in a corner of the room, whispering urgently among themselves. Their voices were low, filled with worry. They all knew the risk of helping an alien. Their mission was simple: rescue any survivors and get out before the enemy arrived. But then the door burst open. A young alien girl staggered inside, her green skin pale from blood loss, her eyes wild with fear. She collapsed at Ethan's feet, gasping for breath. Her alien features were unmistakable: long, sharp ears, violet skin patches, and silver-blue veins running down her arms. She was from the Sci-Fi species, a race that had been ravaging human colonies for years. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He knew what the Sci-Fi had done to Earth's people, and he had every reason to leave her to die. One of his teammates, Sergeant Turner, immediately spoke up, his voice hard. "She's a Sci-Fi, Ethan. Let her die. We don't have time for this. We need to leave, now." But Ethan didn't move. He didn't even respond. His eyes were fixed on the girl, her labored breaths filling the room with the sound of desperation. Her wounds were severe, shrapnel embedded in her side, a nasty gash on her head. Blood was pooling around her, and the soft humming of the medical machines was the only thing breaking the eerie silence in the room. Ethan swallowed hard, torn between his duty as a soldier and his oath as a medic. The soldiers around him were right, helping her could cost them everything. The Sci-Fi had been humanity's enemies for as long as anyone could remember. Their fleet had wiped out entire colonies, leaving nothing but ruins behind. But Ethan's years of training had always taught him one thing: a life is a life. He wasn't going to let someone die if there was a chance he could save them, no matter what species they were. With a deep breath, Ethan knelt beside the girl, his mind already running through medical procedures. He had basic human tools, nothing fancy, nothing advanced. But he also noticed something strange: the alien technology in the room. It was crude compared to what he'd seen from the Sci-Fi military, but there were pieces of equipment that could help. He spoke softly to her, though he didn't expect her to understand. His voice was calm, steady, as if his words could somehow reassure her. "Hang in there," he murmured, pressing his hands against the wound in her side to stop the bleeding. "I'll help you." The girl's eyes fluttered open, her gaze filled with confusion. She tried to speak, but the words came out in her own language, sharp, alien, almost musical. Her voice was weak, and Ethan could barely make out the sounds. She muttered something about dying, too late, no hope, but Ethan couldn't understand. The desperation in her eyes, though, told him everything. Turning to his medical kit, Ethan grabbed the small portable scanner, running it over her body to assess the damage. He didn't have time for any high-tech procedures, this was basic first aid, human style. But when he saw the readings on the scanner, he froze. Her internal injuries were worse than he thought, and if he didn't stabilize her soon, she wouldn't make it. "Stay with me," Ethan whispered, taking a deep breath. "I'm not letting you die." The medic worked quickly, using a combination of basic human tools and alien tech he barely understood. He had no idea how to use the advanced alien equipment, but he had no choice. He reached for a small device that looked like an old-fashioned syringe, pressing it into the girl's side. It whirred to life, and for a brief moment, he thought it wasn't going to work. But then he saw the tiny flicker of light on the device. It was stabilizing her vitals. As he worked, the alien girl's breathing began to slow. Her eyes closed, and for a moment, Ethan wondered if she was slipping away. But then, she spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. "You, human," she muttered. "Why, save me." Ethan paused, his hands still on the girl's body, her life still hanging in the balance. He wasn't sure how to answer. What could he say? That it was his duty? That he couldn't let anyone die, no matter their past? I'm a medic, Ethan replied softly, looking down at the girl's face. And I don't leave anyone behind. For a brief moment, the alien girl's eyes softened. She didn't say anything more, but Ethan could feel the weight of her thoughts. She was confused. She had been taught that humans were nothing more than pests, weak and unworthy of any respect. Yet here was a human who was risking his life for her. Ethan didn't know what would happen next, but he couldn't turn away. For him, it wasn't about the war or the politics, it was about saving a life. And right now, this girl was his responsibility. As the days passed, Liara's condition slowly improved. Her once pale skin was regaining its natural hue, and her breathing became steadier. Ethan had done everything he could to save her, but even now, as she lay in the medical bay, she wasn't entirely free from suspicion. She was aware of her surroundings, but her mind remained clouded with doubt. Every day, she studied Ethan from the corner of her eye, silently trying to figure him out. She had been taught from the moment she could walk that humans were weak, primitive, and beneath the mighty Sci-Fi. Her species had advanced far beyond Earth's people, and humans were nothing more than a nuisance, easily defeated and quickly forgotten. So why, then, was this human helping her? Why risk everything for an enemy soldier? It didn't make sense. Liara's violet eyes flickered open one evening as Ethan worked on a nearby console, analyzing some data from the medical equipment. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from the soft glow of the machines. Despite her growing physical strength, the mental struggle within her remained intense. She was in the hands of her enemy, and the very idea of trusting him felt like betrayal. She watched him quietly. Ethan didn't look like the soldiers she had seen in battle. His face was worn from the horrors of war, his body a little more fragile than she expected, yet he moved with a calm purpose. His actions were precise, almost mechanical, every movement seemed designed to bring her closer to health, not harm. For the first time in her life, Liara found herself questioning everything she had been taught about humans. Her training told her to be wary, to never trust the enemy, especially not one so close. She needed information, anything that could give her an advantage in case things went wrong. She couldn't help herself. Her curiosity got the better of her. "Why are you helping me?" she asked in her own language, her voice hoarse but determined. Ethan, startled by the question, looked over at her. He was surprised she could speak at all, considering the severity of her injuries. But there was no hesitation in his response. He simply smiled, though there was sadness in his eyes. "I'm a medic. It's my job to help, no matter who you are." Liara blinked in disbelief. "Your job?" She had been told her entire life that humans were nothing more than soldiers, fighters, and scavengers. She had never heard of a human who chose healing over destruction. But something about Ethan's tone, his sincerity, made her wonder if she had misunderstood. Liara quickly pushed the thought away. "No, humans are dangerous," she reminded herself. "They are the enemy." Her mistrust didn't vanish overnight. Every interaction with Ethan left her feeling conflicted. She noticed his gentle manner when he adjusted her bandages, the soft way he spoke when explaining her treatment, but she couldn't shake the image of him as the enemy. A soldier, a killer, just like all the others. But even in the face of this discomfort, there was a growing part of her that wanted to believe him. One morning, as she tried to sit up, her head spun from the effort. She gritted her teeth and steadied herself, only for Ethan to rush over, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Take it easy," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "You've been through a lot." Liara's immediate reaction was to shrug his hand off. She hated feeling vulnerable, especially in front of a human. But as soon as she moved, a sharp pain shot through her side. Her breath caught in her throat. Without thinking, she flinched toward him, her hand grasping his arm for support. For a brief moment, she felt the warmth of his hand, the steadiness in his grip, and the weight of his care. Something inside her shifted, and she quickly withdrew her hand, feeling the shame of needing him. She couldn't trust him. He's the enemy. He could betray me at any moment. Yet, as the days went on, Liara began to notice the small things. Ethan never pressured her. He never spoke ill of her people, even when she was angry or harsh toward him. He simply did his job. Perhaps that's all he was doing, she thought. Maybe he doesn't care about the war. Maybe he's just a medic. Her internal battle raged on. Every time she looked into his eyes, she saw something unexpected. It wasn't hatred or anger, it was concern. Something Liara had never imagined a human would feel for her. She was a soldier, an enemy, yet here was this human risking everything to save her. One night, as Ethan was leaving her room to check on the other soldiers, she spoke again, this time with a quieter voice. "You really are different." Ethan paused in the doorway, turning back to face her. His expression softened. "I'm just doing what I was trained to do. And you're more than just a soldier. You're a person." The words hit her harder than she expected. She couldn't reply. Instead, she just looked away, her heart pounding in her chest. The idea that a human, her enemy, saw her as more than just an enemy soldier was a thought too complicated for her to process. In the days that followed, Liara found herself more and more accepting of Ethan's help. It didn't mean she trusted him completely, not yet. But something had changed inside her. She began to see him less as the enemy and more as the person who had saved her life, a person she couldn't ignore. Her trust in him grew, not because of the things he said, but because of the quiet actions he took. And for the first time, Liara began to wonder if everything she had been taught about humans was wrong. As the days passed, Liara's recovery was slow but steady. Her body was healing, but her mind was still trapped in a storm of confusion and suspicion. She lay in the sterile, dimly lit room of the medical bay, her violet eyes constantly shifting, always watching Ethan. Every movement he made, every word he spoke, she scrutinized. This human, this medic, had saved her life, and that fact alone left her feeling unsettled. She had been taught from a young age to fear humans. In the eyes of the Scifistories, the human race was primitive, weak, chaotic, and insignificant in comparison to their advanced civilization. Their technology was a joke. Their military strength, laughable. But what worried Liara more than anything was the fact that humans were unpredictable. Her commanders often told her that humans were driven by strange emotions like compassion, loyalty, and a sense of justice. Emotions that could sometimes be dangerous in battle. As she lay on the bed, she wondered, why was Ethan different? Why had he risked his life to save hers, a soldier of the enemy? Her distrust was deep, but Liara couldn't deny that her thoughts were beginning to shift. Ethan was not what she expected. He wasn't angry or vengeful, as she thought he might be. He didn't look at her with the hatred she had seen in the eyes of others. Instead, he acted with calm focus and precision. Every time he entered the room, she could feel his presence, gentle, steady, and almost caring. Despite her internal conflict, Liara kept a close watch on him. Every time he touched something in the room, her eyes followed his every movement. She was trying to understand him, looking for weaknesses, searching for signs that he could be manipulated. She wanted to know if there was anything she could use against him if needed. Ethan, however, had no idea that Liara was analyzing him so carefully. He was focused on his work, checking her vitals and adjusting the equipment around her. His training had kicked in, and all he could think about was keeping her alive. Yet, inside, he felt torn. He was a medic, a healer, a protector of life. But this alien girl, despite her helpless state, could be a soldier in the war against humanity. His mind was clouded with doubt. What if she was just pretending to be weak? What if she was hiding something, waiting for the right moment to strike? He had been trained to see every alien as a potential threat, especially the Sci-Fi. But as the hours stretched into days, Ethan couldn't ignore the growing sense of discomfort he felt toward his own doubts. He was supposed to help her. That was his mission. He had been trained to heal and save lives, no matter who the person was. Yet, every time he looked at Liara, he couldn't shake the fear that he might be making a mistake. He knew the Sci-Fi had destroyed entire human colonies, his friends, his family, and here he was, saving one of them. One afternoon, as Ethan carefully adjusted her bandages, Liara broke the silence. Her voice was hoarse, weak, but her words were sharp. "Why are you helping me?" Ethan froze for a moment, surprised by the question. It wasn't the first time she had spoken to him, but it was the first time she had asked something so direct, so personal. He tried to hide his hesitation, but Liara's piercing gaze didn't let him. He took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure. "I'm a medic," he said simply. "It's my job to help, not hurt." Liara's eyes narrowed slightly as she processed his words. It didn't make sense to her. In her culture, humans were nothing more than targets, primitive creatures barely worth considering. And here was one helping her, without hesitation, without asking for anything in return. There had to be something else behind it. For the next few days, their interactions remained tense. Every time Ethan tended to her wounds, Liara would watch him closely, studying his every action. She would ask him small questions, trying to gather any information that could give her an advantage. She even tried to provoke him once, making a harsh comment about humanity's weakness, but Ethan remained unfazed. He would simply give a quiet response and continue his work. Liara couldn't figure him out. Was he truly this detached, or was it just a mask he wore to hide his true feelings? She couldn't decide. She began to notice, though, that Ethan never treated her like an enemy. There was no disgust in his eyes, no resentment, only concern. And for someone who had been trained to view humans as inferior, that was confusing. Ethan, on the other hand, was constantly wrestling with his own emotions. Every time he treated her wounds, every time he spoke to her, he felt a deep internal conflict. She was the enemy, but she was also a living being, someone who needed help. He knew the Sci-Fi had destroyed human colonies, had killed his people, and yet here he was, healing one of them. It felt wrong, but at the same time, it felt right. As Liara continued to recover, her mistrust didn't entirely fade. But there were moments when she caught herself watching him with a curiosity she couldn't explain. When he spoke, his voice was calm and reassuring. And in those moments, just for a second, she allowed herself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, humans weren't as bad as she had been told. But as much as Liara began to trust Ethan's competence, she couldn't fully let go of her suspicion. Trusting him meant betraying everything I've ever been taught, she thought. But, he's not what I expected. Her struggle was far from over, but each day, as Ethan continued to heal her, the walls around her heart began to crack, just a little. She didn't know it yet, but with each passing moment, the human medic who had saved her life was changing the way she saw the world, and herself. The air in the medical outpost felt thick with tension. Ethan moved swiftly from one corner of the room to another, checking his equipment. His heart pounded as he glanced over at Liara, who was sitting up in her bed, still weak from her injuries but much stronger than she had been days ago. The enemy forces were closing in on their position. Ethan could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. His time was running out. Liara had to get out of there, and fast. He had made the decision to take her to a safer location, away from the fighting, away from the war. But he knew it wouldn't be easy. They were deep in enemy territory, and the Sci-Fi had been tracking their movements for days. If they didn't leave now, they might never get another chance. "Liara," Ethan said in a low, urgent voice, his eyes scanning the door, "we need to move. Now." Liara, still wary, gave him a sharp look. "What's the plan?" She hadn't fully trusted him yet, but their time together had softened her a little. She knew he wasn't lying, though she still didn't understand why he cared about her. "We're heading for the underground tunnels," Ethan replied. "It's the safest way out of here. But we have to be quick." Liara nodded, her mind racing with thoughts of escape, but just as she tried to rise to her feet, a loud explosion shook the building. The walls trembled, and a heavy, metallic thud reverberated through the air. Ethan's eyes widened as he heard the sound of boots hitting the ground outside. The Sci-Fi were here. "Ambush!" Liara shouted, her instincts kicking in. She grabbed her weapon, which she had been hiding under the bed. But her body was still weak from her injuries, and she felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. "Stay down," Ethan urged, but it was too late. The doors burst open, and alien soldiers flooded into the room, their cloaking devices shimmering in and out of view. A barrage of laser fire erupted, and Ethan ducked behind a table, pulling Liara with him. He could hear the screeching of AI-controlled drones buzzing overhead, their mechanical eyes scanning the room for targets. He gritted his teeth as the sound of weapons fire filled the air. Liara was already moving, her training kicking in. She shot at the drones with precision, taking out 2 of them in quick succession. Ethan watched in awe as she moved with deadly accuracy, despite her injuries. She was a warrior, and in that moment, she wasn't just an enemy, she was an ally. The chaos in the room escalated as the enemy soldiers closed in, their weapons crackling with deadly energy. Ethan fired back with his own sidearm, trying to cover their retreat. He could feel his heart racing in his chest. Every move had to count. "We need to move," Ethan shouted, pulling Liara to her feet. She stumbled but caught her balance. They were running out of time. With the remaining energy in his legs, Ethan sprinted toward the exit, but just as they reached the doorway, a blast knocked him off his feet. Liara was faster this time. She grabbed him by the arm and pulled him to his feet, forcing him to keep moving. Together, they ran through the corridors, the sound of enemy fire echoing behind them. The soldiers were relentless, but Ethan and Liara fought side by side, a team. Their connection was growing stronger with each passing moment, their trust building as they relied on each other to survive. Finally, they reached the underground tunnel entrance. But just as they entered, Liara stopped short, her eyes narrowing. She looked back at Ethan, her face hardening with determination. "Wait, Ethan. I have something to tell you." He stopped, turning to her, his breath heavy. "What is it?" Liara's eyes flickered with a mix of caution and urgency. "The Sci-Fi have a weakness." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "A weakness? What do you mean?" She leaned in closer, her voice low but steady. "The drones, those AI-controlled machines, they have a central control system, a vulnerable core. If we can destroy it, we can take down their entire network." Ethan's mind raced. This was huge. If they could destroy the Sci-Fi's control system, it could cripple their forces. The battle could finally be won. "Where is it?" Ethan asked, his voice tight with excitement. Liara's eyes darted toward the map of the enemy base in the distance. "I can show you, but we have to act fast." She gave him a look of resolve. "If we don't destroy it, they'll hunt us down and wipe us out. We can't afford to waste any more time." Ethan nodded, the weight of the decision settling heavily on his shoulders. This was the break they needed, but it was going to be dangerous. The enemy forces were everywhere, and time was running out. But Liara had already shown him what she was capable of. She wasn't just an alien soldier anymore, she was a comrade. A partner. "Let's do it," Ethan said, a fierce determination in his voice. The two of them shared a look, a silent understanding passing between them. They had come this far together, and now they had a chance to end the war. All they had to do was take down the Sci-Fi's central control system. With their weapons ready, they moved forward into the depths of the enemy stronghold, knowing that every step could be their last. But for the first time, they both believed they might just make it. Together.